CASA, or Community Action for Safe Apartments, is a community-based tenants' rights organization in the Southwest Bronx. We are led by community members who take collective action in fighting for and sustaining safe and affordable housing. We accomplish this through organizing tenants associations, hosting monthly workshops and membership meetings, and building citywide and state-level campaigns. This meeting tonight is part of our monthly Know Your Rights workshop series. We will be covering succession rights and Section 8. So now I'm going to turn it over to Fitzroy to give us an overview of succession rights. Take it away, Fitzroy.
Hey, good evening and welcome everybody. My name is Fitzroy and I'm a CASA leader. First, we'll be covering succession rights. And this refers to the right that a tenant has to inherit a rent stabilized or rent controlled apartment from a close family member if that family moves away or passes away. We know landlords are always up to tricks, and they will, in this instance, attempt to trick you out of your succession rights. And they will try to find a way to not give you the apartment. Why do you think they would want to do that? What incentives do they have to force you to give up your rights?
They would probably want to get rid of an old tenant because they want a rent increase. If you are a new tenant, you have to pay more. Every time there's a new tenant, there's always a rent increase.
This is why it is especially important for us to know our rights and how to use them. To exercise your succession rights, you must have lived in the apartments for 2 years immediately before the original tenant vacates the apartment. If that tenant is a senior citizen, which means over 62 years old, or disabled, you only have to live there for 1 year, not necessarily the 2 years. Unfortunately, family member is defined pretty narrowly and doesn't automatically cover everyone that we normally consider to be our family members. There are two categories of family members. They're called traditional and non-traditional. Traditional family members include wives and husbands as spouses, children, mother, father, brother, sister, stepchildren, stepparents, grandparents, grandchildren, fathers and mothers-in-law, and sons and daughters-in-law. Non-traditional family members include family members and, in some cases, non-family members who have a family-like relationship but don't fit in the traditional category. But you will have to prove that you have both an emotional and a financial and independent commitment between the tenant and yourself. You must be able also to show that you were living with the tenant right before they moved out or passed away. And you should inform the landlord right away that they moved on or that passed away, and that you plan to exercise your succession rights. It is okay to wait until the next lease renewal is sent, but you should make sure that the person who moved out does not sign the renewal lease. That could be considered fraud. And you should not forge the tenant's signature on the leases nor pay rent in their name. That will only complicate matters for you later on. You should write a letter to the landlord because you need documentation in case they want to oppose it about your family member's death or departure, and request to succeed to the lease. Preferably, you should send the letter by certified mail, return receipt requested. That is where you will get that green slip back in the mail as proof that you had mailed the letter and that they had received it and signed for it. Succession rights are an important way for renters to pass on generational wealth. Homeowners are able to pass on wealth by leaving their houses to their children. While renters don't have that same privilege, we can inherit rent-controlled and rent-stabilized apartments from our families. And that is a very valuable asset in a city with such expensive housing as we experience here in New York. Unfortunately, we are losing many elderly and other valuable and vulnerable members of our community to COVID-19. Knowing your succession rights is very important during this time so that you're able to safely remain in your home. If you're running into problems with your landlord about succession rights, you can call the Bronx Legal Services hotline 917-661-4500. You'll be able to speak with someone about your individual case.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, my name is Marilyn Mullins, and I'm a CASA leader. How many people on this call are Section 8 recipients? I'm one. For those who are unfamiliar with the program, there is both project-based and tenant-based Section 8. We'll be covering the tenant-based voucher program during this section, but feel free to ask questions about project-based Section 8 during our question and answering. Section 8 vouchers are administered by local public housing authority using money from the federal government. Local public housing authority in NYC includes NYCHA, which issues about 95,000 vouchers. HPD, which issue about 30,000 vouchers, in HCR, which issue more smaller vouchers. Tenants are able to use their vouchers in private housing. Generally, the tenant will pay 30% of their income rent. And Section 8 will pay the remaining part of the rent. If you have a Section 8 voucher and you are signing a lease on a rent-stabilized apartment, you still have all of the same rights as a rent-stabilized tenant. This is very important. It will not affect your eligibility for Section 8 if you exercise your right as a tenant, including calling 311 to report violation, taking your landlord to court for repairs, and taking collective action with your neighbors. A landlord cannot refuse to rent to you because you have Section 8. Landlords will commonly say that they don't have any apartment available for Section 8 tenants. This is called source of income discrimination, and it's illegal. Make sure you write down what happened when you experience discrimination, and you can report this to the City Commission on Human Rights. A tenant obligation under Section 8 are to supply household income information and allow for housing quality standard inspection in the apartment, live in the apartment, and give prompt notice of move or absence, and pay their share of the rent. You must recertify annually to show if your income has changed or remained the same. The landlord must keep the apartment in good repair and abide by the contract they have made with the city. Reason that Section 8 may try to terminate you if you fail to recertify, commit fraud, or misrepresentation. If you seriously violate the lease or if an apartment does not meet housing quality standards, it if you receive a termination notice or have other questions about navigating the benefit process, you can reach out to the Bronx Legal Service Hotline. Again, this number is 917-661-4500. Now, I'll pass it over to my sister Jocelyn, who will give update on the campaign that we have been working on to protect ourselves and our community during this crisis.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Jocelyn Gómez. CASA, junto con otras coaliciones, tanto estatales y municipales, estamos tratando de proteger y ayudar a los inquilinos de Nueva York. Ok, como les había dicho, estamos trabajando con coaliciones tanto estatales como municipales, simplemente para tratar de proteger a nuestros inquilinos. La coalición del derecho a una representación legal junto con nosotros, hemos tratado de conseguir muchas cosas. Le voy a hablar a ustedes de las cosas positivas que hemos conseguido. Nosotros como CASA y las coaliciones que ya le mencioné anteriormente, estamos trabajando y ganamos que nos puedan extender la moratoria de desalojo de los apartamentos. O sea, que conseguimos que hasta a mitad de junio ningún dueño de edificio pueda desalojarlo a ustedes su apartamento. Pero como todos ustedes saben, desde, por ejemplo, inquilinos que todavía no habían pagado la renta desde marzo, porque inclusive la pandemia comenzó a partir del 8 de marzo y en ese trayecto habíamos inquilinos que no habíamos pagado aún la renta e inmediatamente nos quedamos sin trabajo. Llegó marzo, llegó abril, llegó mayo y por ahí viene junio. Toda esa renta que le debemos de pagar a los dueños de edificio están sobre nosotros y ustedes saben que actualmente hemos quedado sin trabajo, nos hemos enfermado y debido a eso nosotros, CASA y nuestras coaliciones estamos trabajando para que tratando de que el gobernador Cuomo por lo menos nos dé 3 o 4 meses de renta sin pagar, debido a lo que ya le expliqué anteriormente. También nosotros estamos luchando porque el gobernador Cuomo posicione 92,000 personas que no tienen vivienda. Estamos trabajando con el grupo de vivienda para todos para saber cuáles son los detalles de esta política y cómo funciona y cómo se aplica.
We are now at a critical part of our workshop. We have some experts with us this evening. And before we opening it up, we are going to ask them to identify themselves as the members of the panel. Let us know the organization you're with, the area of your expertise, and then we will open it up to all our members for questions.
Good evening. I'm Tom Meneke. I am an attorney with the Tenant Protection Unit, and our job is to enforce the rent regulations. And I'm happy to be here and talk about succession rights.
Hi, everybody. My name is Paris Rasmussen. I'm at the New York State Tenant Protection Unit also. I'm an assistant counsel there, and I'm excited to be here tonight, too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from the New York City Commission on Human Rights. I'm an assistant commissioner of the Law Enforcement Bureau, and we focus on protecting against discrimination in housing as well as other areas. And I can answer questions about source of income discrimination.
Hi, I'm Robert Desir. I'm a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society. I work on source of income discrimination. I work on a lot of our work around the rent stabilization laws. And also work around Section 8 vouchers.
Okay, welcome everybody. While you're writing down questions, we're going to start off with a general question based on an experience a lot of our members have had. If a landlord tells me that they won't rent to me because they don't accept Section 8, what can I do?
So hi, this is Kathy from Commission on Human Rights. Our agency allows people to file complaints on their own behalf, so you don't need a lawyer. Is being told that they are not eligible for an apartment because they pay their rent with Section 8. You can reach out to us by calling 311 or reporting through our website, which is nyc.gov/human-rights, and someone will reach out to you to conduct an intake. If it's happened recently, within the last week or so, and there's the possibility that the apartment's still open, we have a team of folks that, or we call them interventionists. They can reach out and attempt to negotiate specifically for that apartment that you were viewing to get you into that apartment. So if you are experiencing this, the name of the broker or the landlord you were working with and all of their contact information, and then reach out to us as soon as possible after it has an apartment.
Some folks may not be capable of using technologies that will let it go online, and some people are frustrated with the 311 system. You call, can they?
Yes, that's right.
Can you repeat the number, please?
718-722-3131.
In addition to filing a complaint with the commission, you can also file a plenary action in state Supreme Court, based on the city law that was mentioned, and also based on the state law. If in some cases where there is a disability component, there may be a cause of action in federal court as well.
Okay, so you'll be going to the Supreme Court, bypassing housing court completely to get this thing resolved. Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, this is not in the jurisdiction of housing court as an initial matter. There isn't a lot of avenues in housing court for tenants to initiate actions against their landlord. It may serve as a defense in some instances in a housing court case, but largely it's because it's a tenant initiated action. Housing court is not available for the relief that they'd be looking for.
Tengo una pregunta para ellos. Pues, si yo tengo un caso en la corte, ¿puede ese caso llevarse en efectivo?
If I have a case in the court, can it move forward during these days?
Well, if it is a two-attorney case, there are some instances where there are some proceedings happening. If there's discovery, if there may be virtual arguments on motions, but largely housing court is unavailable for new filings unless it's an emergency situation like an HP, tenant initiated action, or an illegal lockout claim. So the landlord, sending you these notices are, kind of outside of the court system, but there isn't anything to prevent the landlord from actually sending you the notice. It doesn't have any legal effect. It can't summon you to court because the court is not accepting filings.
I want to ask a question about succession rights. And what I want to know is that when some people move in to help an elderly person, and then they end up being there for a long time, caring for that person. And it could be a relative. And the next thing you know, when they go and tell the landlord that I want to be put on the lease, they refuse to put the person on the lease. I'm not looking, to say succession, but if the person's been put on the lease and they've been there for a year, are they entitled to the same rights as a tenant?
So putting somebody on the lease is different than establishing succession rights, just
Okay.
so, yeah.
Okay,
So,
okay, good.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a distinction there. There could be a run-up to that, like, let's say your grandmother says, you know what, I'm going to retire. I've had it with New York. I'm moving, and the caretaker is still in that apartment. Now it moves into a succession issue because the primary tenant is vacated.
Right.
But that time that you're spending in the apartment as a caretaker, as a family member, as the primary residence. Remember, there's 3 elements for succession rights. And the grandmother vacates, then you can establish your succession rights.
Okay, thank you.
As a follow-on to Paulette's question, Tom, in the event that the caretaker is not a family member, or maybe a niece, nephew, who normally don't fall into the traditional family category, but they gave up their home that they had to come to stay with and take care of this elderly person, what rights do they have to succeed based on the fact that they had given up their own home to be able to stay there? They have met all the other requirements except that they are a traditional family member.
Yeah, well, they at least have the right to file a motion in support of their application of a succession rights issue. That's for sure, because it sounds that person would not be the first person who is a caretaker outside the general definition of a traditional family to inherit an apartment, to actually be successful in a succession. There is case law on that. That supports caretakers, so long as that caretaker has that financial, that could evolve into that very family-like relationship, whereas that financial and emotional interdependence. So it's definitely possible.
So my question is for the human rights, on the aspect of human rights. I want to know if they consider that the people that live on 1515, if we are human or not, because we have called 911 already to report all kinds of pests, all kinds of heating issues. We've called 311, pardon. We are complaining against extreme heat. And they said that the complaints about extreme heat can only be made until the summer or before the summer starts. But if I'm not able to sleep because there's a leak and there's a rat infestation, then I don't know what the value is on people saying that they're defending human rights, because I don't know what else we have to do for us to our needs to be heard. And I don't think they need to be heard because everybody has heard them already. What we need to do is have these be resolved. And so I think I'm just curious if we are considered human or we are considered animals in order for this to be resolved. Thank you.
The building that David is referring to is the building in which CASA is working. And they are in court, and they're also engaged in, kind of slacking for the moment because of the conditions we are living in right now.
Well, yeah, that was going to be my first recommendation, Fitzroy, was to start working with an organization that might help them organize. But unfortunately, I think there's a little bit of a confusion about what our agency is called, because our focus really is on civil rights. So discrimination on the basis of someone's membership in a protected class, so race, national origin, things like that. What you're talking about, I think, there definitely are legal protections for, and it sounds like those are being pursued already. If the landlord is, or if there's any sense or reason to believe that the landlord is not taking action because of this group's particular national origin or race, then that's something that our office could get involved in. But if the landlord is being equally awful to everyone, unfortunately, that doesn't fall under our jurisdiction. But as you know, since there is this court case already going on, there are other legal protections to help with that. I know that's a wholly unsatisfactory answer, I'm sorry to say, but
So my question is that in my lease, we've been living here since 2010, but I only get the lease with my name. But when I ask for a letter or to get a letter to write down who is living here, but in the lease, they never add those names. One of my children, for example, he wants to inherit the apartment. So is it enough that I have a letter that my son has lived here since 2010, or should they have had been on the lease?
So long as you can establish that your child lived there, because he or she, if it was a female, meet all the requirements of being a traditional family member. They have lived there for more than 2 years, and there is the emotional relationship, financial relationship that exists, that getting your rights are almost a slam dunk. Whether or not the landlord wants to fight it is a different story. But you have all the rights there, and there's no absolute need for that person to be on the lease as a leaseholder.
I think this question is for Robert. I'm listening to a lot of people saying how deplorable their buildings are, and how the landlord, I'm quite sure for years, have not really kept their end of the bargain of making sure that the tenant has the proper services. Now, is it possible as a strong tenants association that the tenants association could take over that building and make sure the necessary funds is used to, do all the repairs? How long do a landlord has a right to constantly not give you services? Because I know the landlord has been penalized several times with the court to do that, and they just haven't done it. Can a tenant take over the building?
Hey, Robert, would you want to maybe speak briefly on some of the escalations that may be part of that process, like working together, the AEP, the ERP? I'm involved as a part of the whole process leading towards maybe the receivership in the whole 70 process. Explain what tenants can do to get HPD direct involved to any of those two programs to get the repairs done.
Yeah, I think that's, like I said, the 7A is an extreme remedy. And, I kind of described like what the mechanisms are, but beyond that, I would advise people to speak directly with an attorney about their particular situation. The first thing I think that people can do is gauge interest in their buildings and, kind of figure out what strength there is, what will there is to move collectively. That would have a much stronger effect than an individual tenant fighting with the landlord on their own.
So for 2 years, I haven't had a lease from my landlord. Can my landlord kick me out?
I think one of the big questions is the apartment rent stabilized or not? Because that kind of draws out the analysis of where the whole thing goes. So I can only speak to as if it was a rent stabilized apartment. So I'll give you the rent stabilized scenario. Having lease or not having lease under rent stabilization doesn't change anything. It doesn't change your rights. It doesn't change whether or not you're protected from eviction. Whether you have the lease or not, you are protected by the rights the rights afforded under rent stabilization. So under rent stabilization, there's a couple things to keep in mind. No lease. First of all, the only person that benefits from a lease under rent stabilization is the owner, because the lease is the mechanism that allows the owner to increase the rent under rent stabilization. So long as the owner provides you with that lease, the rent can be increased as in accordance with the RGB, allowable RGB increases, right? So no lease means no rent increase. So if the owner has increased the rent since 2010, I believe that statement was, that's a potential overcharge. number one. And number two, if you want to get your lease, you can always do that under rent stabilization by filing a lease violation complaint with the DHCR.
I just wanted to add that if you are a person who pays your rent with Section 8 and the landlord is refusing to process renewal paperwork in that situation, that's also a type of source of income discrimination, and you should bring that to our office because we're happy to get involved and help negotiate to make sure that you don't lose your Section 8 and you don't lose your apartment.
Again, thank you so very much on behalf of CASA and our members. And now I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to wrap it up.
Hi, I'm back. So as Fitzroy mentioned, we just want to thank our panelists again and thank everyone else who joined us for our first virtual workshop. You can follow us on social media. We are at CASA Bronx on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And for more information about the cancel rent fight, you can visit housingjusticeforall.org and write to councilnyc.org. Ready? CASA.
Power.
CASA.
Power.
En casa.
Today.
En casa.
Today.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We hope you got something valuable out of this workshop. Please reach out to Abby if you have more questions. And we hope to see you at the next workshop. Bye, everybody.
Good
Take
night,
care.
everybody.
Stay healthy.
Bye. Bye-bye.